Welcome to Beyond the Drywall. This is the place where we talk about tools, tenants, and the truths about property management and construction that nobody else will say. This is not some guru corporate, you too can make passive income in real estate spiel. This is a gritty, real-world survival guide, presented in a humorous yet no BS manner. I'm John, and I didn't set out to be a property manager. In fact, 7 years ago, I was broke, homeless, and riding Uber around to manage rentals. Today I run 2 companies. This is my story. Luckily, there was no mold. The repairs were done quickly, and the tenant was back inside the unit. About 60 days later, the owner calls and tells me he wants to sell the unit. The tenant's lease was about up, so timing was just right. I agreed to meet the realtor, who I already knew, and had a good relationship with. We decided to meet up at the house to go over what we needed to do to give the unit some curb appeal. Now this is where the story gets a little crazy. Between the time the water pipes were fixed and the owner decided to sell the property, the tenant had pretty much converted the entire unit into a mini working farm. Let me say that again, the tenant converted a Baltimore inner city row home and its small yard into a working farm. When I drove up, you could literally see at least 20 chickens running around from the back to the front of the yard, obstructed by all the tall straw grass. There were 2 large dogs inside the house. Upon further inspection, we discovered there was a full quail hatchery inside the back sunroom section of the house. I did not even know you could raise quail domestically inside of a house. It turns out that smoked quail meat is a popular thing. There were even more rooster pens out in the back. The second floor had a bedroom that was just packed full of reptiles, turtles, and aquatic tanks. The tenant, it seems, was selling eggs, smoked quail meat, chickens, and reptiles to make money. I'm walking around the place stunned, wondering just how we are going to clean up all this mess up and sell this little Green Acres nightmare we got going on here. I mean, at this point, is it a feature? Or, something I need to get cleaned up quickly before the city rolls in with violations? I immediately told the tenant that he was shut down, that this was in complete violation of his lease, that he needed to get rid of all this stuff ASAP. I had already informed him earlier that we would not be renewing his lease, so he knew the jig was up. The tenant started rambling about moving to West Virginia, and that he already had a line on a new place to live. So at least there would be no fight there. The most bizarre twist of the whole thing? The realtor had lived on a farm most of her adult life. She was not fazed one bit at this ecological disaster. It all seemed normal to her. We came up with a plan, and I had about a week's grace to take care of it. She then started talking to the tenant, and the next thing you know, she opens the back of her BMW SUV and throws a couple chickens in the back of it and took off. I kid you not. Well, at least that was an easy one. No real damage had a chance to happen. The neighbors were relieved. However, I would have to say that in all my years of being a property manager, one of the worst situations I found myself in was the one where I had a tenant quickly decline mentally and then got progressively more and more violent. It started out with calls about not having enough security cameras on the front entrance of the building, something about a friend who had come over, who was no longer a friend and may have stolen his keys. He now feared for his safety. Okay, we had the locks changed. I then got another call about how there were thieves rappelling down off the roof into his 3rd floor apartment to steal stuff. He was also convinced that they had stolen his identity, and they were now coming for him. Now the guy was an attorney, and constantly reminded me of that fact. So for that reason, I had to take him seriously. He would go on about how he did not like to sue people, but would if he felt that he needed to. A few more weeks down the road, and things really went south after he allegedly threatened to kill me if I entered his apartment. So then conversations either focused on him, either suing me, or making suggestions about my untimely demise. To which I responded, "Hey, I'm a Baltimore City landlord. Get in line." At that point, I actually had to file a peace order, like a restraining order, to get some distance between us. Which I don't know if anyone else has had to do that, but let me tell you, it's a process. You have to really prove that you need the thing. It's not like you go down to court and file a simple piece of paper and you are done. No, you need to fill out several pieces of paper, then have an appointment with someone who reviews your documents, and then a judge has to look it over, and then once they are convinced that you are in fact in need of a protective order, then you are granted one on a limited basis, good for only months, not years. Fortunately, I had enough supporting documentation that my position was easily able to show a real need. Then even more emails and texts suggesting additional bad things came, which is not good as an individual, but when other tenants get freaked out by something that a fellow tenant sends them, then you really must step things up, especially when one of the other tenants is also an attorney. So now, I've got all kinds of stresses going on. The safety of myself, my tenants, my company. Of course, the owner of the building was like, just get him the hell out of there now. Local law enforcement was of absolutely no help. I'd called in a couple of times, and their response was simply, "Has he shot anybody yet?" "No? Well, if he does give us a call." I tried to get mental health services out to the building. Nothing seemed to work. I ended up filing for a second peace order against him after the first one expired, which I easily got. The tenant then took his sideshow on over to the building next door, where he confronted the tenants in that building, who happened to live at the same window level. He was convinced that they had stolen not only his Wi-Fi, but were monitoring all of his activities. There, he knocked on that poor bastard's front door with a camera in hand, shoved it in his face, and then proceeded to aggressively interrogate him. So now, I am having to deal with that building's owner's concerns. Just remember this one thing. It's always the smart, mentally ill tenants that often cause you the most grief. Their arguments are just so well put together, and they can be relentless until they get their way. We had another tenant, a highly educated elderly lady. She seemed to be the type of person that you would want to be a tenant for many years. Initial conversations were always pleasant. That is, until the day the SWATs show up at her unit and shattered the door. Her son, who was always a present figure, was also an educated and articulate guy. Now, it's hard to explain this part, but they were always trying to come from a position of strength, as they were trying to get one over on you. You would receive this long dissertation as to why you needed to give them a discount, provide some special service, give grace, etc. All this was always based on some legal precedent, ADA rulings, or city ordinances. Apparently, the son had recently gone through a rough domestic split. He had allegedly kidnapped his daughter, who lived in D.C. with her mother, and brought her back to Baltimore. Baltimore police had made a couple of attempts to coordinate with me their entrance into the building. Each time, the child was not there. The police then got a tip that the child was in the building and proceeded on without my assistance. The police decided to simultaneously come in from the front of the building, the back entrance, and had even climbed the fire escape and came down from the floor above. At the time, they were in full combat gear. Helmets, vests, shields, weapons, battering ram, the whole shebang. They then shattered the apartment door with the battering ram and gained entrance into the unit. Unfortunately, the child was not there, and the police left once they had fully searched the unit. Afterwards, the tenant's son calls me and tells me that the door was having trouble locking and that he was concerned about safety. When I got there, the big, solid, heavy 120-year-old door was now in splinters. I'll never forget the son looking me straight in the eye and telling me that since it was the police that shattered the door, that he was not liable for damages. I went back and looked it up, and he was right. Imagine that. The tenant is not responsible for damages to a door that the police destroy in the performance of their duties. So, I guess I just send the city the bill? Ha! Yeah, right. No! And that's the thing that nobody really understands about being a property manager. Inner city property managers are replacing much of the social services infrastructure, all for an 8 to 10% commission a month. Owners really do not see just how much is done for them, all the behind-the-scenes support. Many just think that we sit around collecting their money, take our cut, and then try and figure out new and interesting ways to relieve them out of what's left. But let me ask you something. When there is a fire, flood, domestic disturbance, or potential for a violent situation, who do you think is most often the very first person that the tenant calls? Why is that, do you think? I'll tell you why. On most of these calls, the tenant already knew in advance what had happened to make the situation what it is. They also know that property managers can't actually arrest anyone. We really can't enforce jack shit. So of all the safest alternatives to avoiding the police department, the fire department, or some other emergency services reporting and having to answer a lot of questions, tenants just instinctively call the local property manager first. Doesn't necessarily work that way with the bigger corporate property managers, but if you are a small local guy, have a known face and a phone number that they are already familiar with. Yeah, you get the call. Now, all of this does not mean that I won't also call City Protective Services as well, but if it involves the loss of value to the unit, I need to take an interest, because ultimately I will be the one explaining it to the owner, regardless who shows up. Local property managers by default are now becoming the unrecognized social worker that comes out and checks on the tenant. Tenants also know that we have our own support system in place, so they rely on us to deal with it. There was this time I had a tenant that was a little difficult to work with. This tenant was a legacy tenant when we took on the property. She was a little quirky, but seemingly harmless. She tended not to bother anyone, other than being a known pot smoker that had a habit of ripping down smoke detectors off the walls. Now this tenant had resided in the building for about 13 years. Her unit was lucky enough to have a ground-level porch and side entrance leading to a small garden. That is something unusual in city. As I said, the tenant had lived there for around 13 years, which coincidentally matched the prison sentence that her husband received for various criminal acts. Fortunately for me, he had paid his debt and was now returning back to polite society. And unfortunately for me, he had also decided to rekindle the romance that he once had with his wife. Maintenance had given me reports about a man spending time sitting out on the side porch of the building with a very large knife strapped to his leg. They also mentioned that there was a strong smell coming from the immediate area. They specifically noted that it was not the marijuana kind of smell. "I see," said the blind man. "Now, I've got another problem to deal with. This was a nice building. I liked the tenants there, and the only reason we had this situation was that she was a legacy. So, there I am, 9 o'clock on a Friday night, trying to decide if I want a bowl of ice cream, when I get the call. 'Mr. John, we have a fire in the building. Can you come down?' Wait, what? A fire? Call the fire department." Well, it's not a fire, but smoke. And the smoke is gone now. It was really thick in the hallway, but it stopped. Can you come down? Still, if there was heavy smoke in the halls, call the fire department. I'm technically in another county. I needed the tenant to make the call. So I'm on my way. I get down there. The smoke detectors have stopped beeping and the alarms were no longer giving instructions. The place was clear. I'm now confused, but I checked the building from top to bottom. I had talked to the other tenants in the building, and everyone said everything was fine now. There had been smoke coming from the first floor unit, but it had stopped. They tried to get the person inside to open up the door, but he was uncooperative. It was now 10 p.m. I knocked on the door, and a man replied from behind that because of the tricky door lock he was unable to open the door. Now is the time that I should point something out about being a property manager that I learned early on. After the sun sets, property management takes on a whole new ballgame. It's no longer about showing apartments and selling the benefits of the neighborhood. No, it's rental police time. I understand that, but you need to open the door now, I instructed. I've had reports of a fire coming from this unit. Nope, no fire here, was the reply. I then called the actual tenant who lived in the unit, who informs me that she was visiting at her relative's house for the night. I went around to the side of the porch, and the door there was wide open. I called the tenant again and told her that the house was unsecure and that I should check things out. Did I have her permission to go inside and close the door? Yes, that's fine. That's all I needed. 10:30 at night in Baltimore. Entering an open property where a convicted drug-using felon with a large knife was hiding out. Yeah, good times. Let me tell you. I looked over at the kitchen area where there was a large blackened pot that appeared to have been used to fry chicken. It was sitting on top of a now charred stovetop against a sooted backsplash. The chef, it seems, had quickly departed the scene of the crime. I remember muttering, "No fire my ass." I got my pictures, shut the door, and then got the hell out of there. And that's just what it's like. So between the domestic disturbances, the fires, the floods, the gas leaks, the reports of drug activity, threats of violence from tenants, kidnappings, roommate disagreements, loud parties, reports of tenants entertaining multiple different clients every night, and the occasional mentally unstable in-your-face tenant. These are just some of the things that a property manager needs to become aware of and learn how to handle the situation, and when to call for backup. Today's takeaway. 1. Unofficially, expect about 4% of your tenant to suffer from mental illness. Be prepared. Your tenants have rights. Respect that and always try to be a professional, no matter what situation comes up. 2. If there is a fire, threat of violence, or some other emergency, always call in the professionals. You are not trained for that. 3. Always investigate anything that threatens the value of an owner's property. You are ultimately the one that will have to answer those kinds of questions.